Good evening. It is wonderful to see everyone this evening. We have been looking for the last few Sunday nights so far at the idea of apologetics, essentially, but specifically the idea of different ways that we can see God in the world around us. This is meant to give us, kind of like our series that we've started on Sunday mornings, it's meant to give us information, it's meant to give us knowledge that we can use as we're interacting with people. In this case, as we're interacting with people who might be questioning God, might be questioning creation, might be questioning things like that, to help them know that there is actually plenty of things to really dig into that point back to God. So we've looked at things like DNA and the intricacy of the cell. We're now going to get a little more macroscopic, if you will. We're not having to use a microscope anymore. And we're going to look at the eye tonight. We're going to look at the complexity of the eye. Now, a couple of caveats that I want to throw out there, and then I'll have a couple more here in a second. But when we look at the eye, for our purposes tonight, we're going to be looking at essentially the human eye, right? We're going to be looking at I hate to use this terminology, but a more complex eye, meaning there are animals and different creatures that have eyes that aren't as fancy and as complex as the human eye. And so a lot of times, for example, if we were to bring up something like what we're going to look at tonight, an evolutionist or an atheist might say, well, yeah, but you're looking at the most complex one. It didn't start that way. It started simple and then developed into something complex. Well, we'll talk about some of that in a moment, but I do want to give that caveat that that's kind of what we're looking at, and we'll address some of those other things in a second. But I want us, as we begin, to draw our attention to a quote by Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin, of course, is the father, if you will, of the theory of evolution. He's the one who put forth the initial idea that everything evolved from one creature or something along those lines. He says in his book, if I remember right, this is in the book Origin of the Species and not just a conversation. I believe this is in the book. He says, to suppose that the eye with all its inimitable contrivances, in other words, with all its fancy stuff, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I confess, absurd in the highest degree. Now, you might be reading this and you might think, well, that seems unlikely. Why in the world would the guy saying that the eye evolved by evolution say that it seems silly for the eye to evolve by evolution? Well, a lot of times, I want to be fair to Darwin, we do take this quote a little bit out of context, because he goes on to say, however, even though it seems absurd, when we look at the fact that there are simple eyes and complex eyes and stuff like that, maybe it could work out to where he finishes this quote by saying, essentially, the difficulty of believing it can be formed by natural selection doesn't seem, reasonable to our imagination, but it shouldn't be considered subversive of the theory. A lot of 19th century words being used there to basically say he admits it seems ridiculous for the eye to have developed by natural selection, but he believes that even though it seems ridiculous, that it's actually not that ridiculous. So, the second caveat then. Again, we want to be fair with the evidence. One of the things that we emphasized when we first started this series, we want to be honest in how we approach apologetics. If something seems like it supports our position being that God created the world, we don't want to just accept something that supports our position that might not be accurate, that might not be true, or that might be misleading, or that might take a quote from Charles Darwin out of context, or whatever. We want to be fair. So, to be fair to Darwin, number one, he's not saying that he actually believes the eye disproves his theory. He's admitting that it would seem to go against his theory, but in actuality, he thinks that even though at the face value it would go against his theory, that in fact he believes it would not. That's kind of what we're going to look at tonight. Is it actually fair to say that you can actually look at the eye, and even though initially, no, this doesn't seem like it could have evolved, could it maybe have evolved kind of an idea? Can we get there, essentially, is what we're going to look at. And I think what we're going to find is that no, we can't. But let's begin with a question. Someone hits their head, whether this is a kid or an adult. I remember one time I was well, maybe I shouldn't say this. I want Dad to sound bad. It was a complete accident. Dad was giving me a piggyback ride on his shoulders, and he accidentally tripped and fell, and we fell backward, and I kind of barely bumped my head, didn't do any damage at all, and y'all are like, yeah, right, that's why you are the way you are. But anyway, it didn't do any damage at all, but Mom was worried when it first happened, and so what do you think she did? Do what? No, not that first. First of all, what do you think she did? Ah, good. She looked at the eyes. Specifically, she shone a flashlight in the eyes to see if my eyes would dilate or not. Anytime you go to the doctor, the eye doctor specifically, like the optometrist, I always get optometrist, ophthalmologist mixed up. I think it is optometrist, right? But anytime you go there, one of the things they usually do is they have some kind of something, whether it's drops or something like that, depending on what you're having done, that is going to affect the dilation of your eyes. They're going to measure the dilation. They're going to do these different things. Some of it they do for checkup. If you have to have certain procedures, they have to like fully dilate your eyes to do something. Eyes have a very interesting mechanism in terms of how they function. Anyone know why eyes dilate? But why? Yeah, you're right. They dilate or contract based on how bright or how dark it is. But why? Okay, good. If you are in the dark and you're not letting enough light in, it's going to be even harder to see. It's already dark, but if you're letting even less light in, well, then it's hard to see. If you're in a very bright area, for example, how many of y'all have been blinded by headlights going down the road before, right? And it's getting worse because nowadays, a lot of times, and I think our car's probably one of them, to be fair, but I think a lot of times, even when a car's not on its brights, it's still ridiculously bright at this point because we have some really good headlight technology now. But when you look at that light that's coming towards you, and all that light's coming at you, what does that do for your vision? It makes it hard to see, right? So if you are trying to see, when it's dark, you need to let as much light in as possible so that you can see. If you don't, you won't be able to see. But if it's too bright, you need to let as little light in as possible because otherwise it'll blind you, you still won't be able to see. So imagine just for a moment if our eyes just had one setting. We didn't have anything to control how much or how little light comes in. For example, this camera right here that is videoing this lesson. This camera, to my knowledge, it doesn't have anything to make the lens smaller or bigger, or I guess we should say the opening to the lens smaller or bigger. It just has one setting. So for example, if I were to take my flashlight on my phone out, and I were to do this, I'm curious to see what's going to happen because I haven't tried this before. If I were to do something like this, it's probably going to create some distortions in the video because it's more light all of a sudden than it's used to, and so it's going to create a problem. But our eyes, they do this automatically. If you talk about someone, for example, having blue eyes or brown eyes or something like that, that is the color of what's called the iris. Now, this is a close-up, by the way. I know some people are a little bit finicky about eyes and close-ups of eyes. I apologize if that's you, but I'm trying to kind of give us a sense of it. That's why I went this close on it. So this is the pupil right here. That's where, basically, that's the hole that the light goes in. But I don't know if you can see all this kind of texture around here in the iris. Those are all tiny little muscles in your eye, essentially. These muscles in the iris, they automatically detect how bright or how dim the light is around you, and they pull back or pull forward to dilate or constrict to exactly the right amount given the situation. Now again, my eyes, according to people who don't believe in creation and in God, just kind of happen through natural processes. I don't think anyone would say that about this camera that's taking this video, and yet the camera doesn't even have a manual version of that function, right? But let's keep going. This camera is a cheap camera, but have you ever seen some of these high-quality cameras? Some of them are ridiculous, right? I've seen ones that are just about a foot long or something. It's really long. Anyone know why cameras that are more high quality are really long like that? Like that cylinder on the front of it. Why are they so long? Anybody know? Do what? Not quite. They adjust something, but it's not the amount of light that comes in and out. Why are they so long? Okay. There is a lens inside the camera. In order to focus, which means to have a clear view of a specific object, you have to, in almost every camera that's out there right now, you have to move the lens physically to be able to focus. For example, if I wanted to take a really clear picture of the board back there where it says 71, I would have to move the lens from here, from where I am. I would have to move the lens to a certain position to get that clearly in the lens. But if I wanted to get a really, really good picture of my wife, well, then I'd have to adjust that distance because all of a sudden, now the back is going to be in focus and she's going to be out of focus, so I have to change the distance. That's how most cameras work. Now, have you ever seen anyone who has long eyes? Now, sometimes, granted, we kind of do this or something like that if we're trying to see something closer, but typically speaking, I can look at the back wall and, like, I know you can't see what I'm seeing, but when I look at the back wall, Liz is not in focus. She's kind of blurry, right? When I look at Liz, now all of a sudden the back wall is not in focus. We do that automatically. We don't even think about it. We focus on one thing, we focus on another thing, we focus on another thing. And what was once sharp, because we're focusing on it, is now blurry. Well, our lenses and our eyes aren't moving back and forth like they would with a camera. What's actually happening is the lens itself changes shape. We have a lens in our eyes that is connected to different muscles than the iris. The iris, remember, is the one that makes the pupil bigger or smaller to let light in. But our actual lens in our eye, it actually literally changes shape. You have muscles attached to it, really, really strong muscles, by the way. Some of the strongest in your body are the muscles in your eye. And they pull or push or whatever with the lens, just split second, to change the shape of the lens to the perfect degree that it focuses on what your eye wants to focus on. Even when you're reading down a page or a screen in this case, you look at one line, then you move down to the next line. If you notice, even that little move of switching your focus from line 1 to line 2 to line 3, the lines around it become a little bit different focused, but the one that you're actually focusing on becomes clearer as your eyes move down to the next line. That is literally the lens, the clear thing inside your eyes changing shape to allow your focus. Now just for a second, think about how many times that happens just in a single day. How many times the lens in your eyes has to change shape, to just look around and do your daily activities, right? They are just now, like as of the last 5 years, they are just now starting to make what they call liquid lenses for cameras that can do something very similar in concept, but not nearly as efficient to what our eyes do. Meaning they put a specific kind of transparent liquid into I don't know what you want to call it, a little chamber, and they apply pressure to the chamber and it kind of changes the opacity or whatever and all this kind of stuff. And so that just now they're starting to kind of experiment with doing it that way instead of having a static lens that you have to move forward and backward in the camera. And yet human eyes have been able to do this for thousands of years. Now, whenever the idea of liquid lenses and cameras first came out, people were like, wow, this is revolutionary. This technology is amazing. And it is continuing to prove very useful. And yet that was created, and supposedly our eyes, even with all the simple eyes that are out there, somehow it still wasn't any kind of intelligence directing it, supposedly. Think about something else. Cameras, they have these small units in the cameras. At this point in how our cameras have developed, we're talking about like millions of pixels now. In fact, if you hear the term megapixels, that's how many millions of pixels are in the camera, what do you call it? I don't know what all the parts of the camera exactly are. Basically, the part that actually takes in the light to create the picture for you, the part that the light hits and it captures that, it has all these pixels on it. Generally speaking, each of those pixels has 3 different colors on it. Kind of like your computer screens or your TV screens, same type of thing. It has pixels on it. Now, all these small units called pixels, they detect color specifically. And so they're designed to catch the color in the photo. Because of course, now we have the color photos. Typically, most people use color photos. They're designed to detect the photo, or the color in the photo, and then they're able to relay that if you print it off or if you put it on a screen or whatever the case might be. But literally millions of these small things. It's crazy to think about. Our eyes, though, you might think, well, our eye is just one thing, right? Oh, no. Oh, no, 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 no. Remember how we talked about how fancy and how complicated a cell is? Well, we have cells that do the same job as pixels. Except in the retina, which is the part where all those cells are, it's also millions of units. They're called cones. There's also even way, way more units that are not called cones. They're called rods, and they actually just pick up light or no light. They don't pick up color. But you also have millions of units called cones. They not only pick up color similar to pixels, but they have a higher resolution, and they can detect a wider range of colors. Once again, how does that happen if there's nobody directing it? It's just... Let's think about a simple eye for just a second. A simple eye. Let's say that you have, for example, a just basic cell that kind of takes light, transmits it to electrical signal, and the creature, usually like an insect or something like that for a simple eye, will be able to detect, oh, there's light here, oh, there's no light here, oh, there's movement here, or there's no movement there. Okay, that's fine, but to go from one to the other, you're still talking about massive steps in between. You see that part of the quote that we didn't fully flesh out because it would have taken way more screen than I wanted to devote to it? That part of the quote in between the first part and the last part of Darwin? Basically, his point is, as we continue researching, we're going to be able to see all these intermediate type eyes. All these eyes in between the simple ones and the complex ones. He had the same philosophy about fossils and things like that as well. As science continues, we're going to find all these different intermediate forms of, yeah, no, we never found that. Yes, there are some simpler eyes and some more complex eyes, but they're not intermediate. They're distinct. There's this kind of eye and there's this kind of eye. There's not a way to go from one to the other. We don't see that in nature. We don't see that in the animal kingdom or anything else. One other thing. Anybody know what happens when you try to read something in a mirror? Can anyone read this? Okay. This is, I think, Polish or something. This is just the one I found online. But this is like Polish for mirror reading, is literally what this says in Polish. But it's using our letters, right? It's using what we might call English lettering. I think they use the same alphabet. But anyway, when we look at this, it's interesting when we think about it. Now, by the way, this is getting more into the brain side of the brain and the eye, or the eye and the brain. But still, it's fascinating. When we look at this, what is wrong or what is different about this writing? Because it's not just the letters are flipped left to right. What happens when we have a mirror reflecting words back at us? Anybody know? Liz and her family and I were having a fun conversation about mirrors the other day. They're so weird when you really stop and think about it. What actually happens with a mirror when you have writing in a mirror that's reflected back in a mirror, it doesn't do this per se, meaning it doesn't just like flip like this or flip like this or whatever. It actually flips it back to where it's as if you're looking at it from inside the mirror. That's how the reflection works, essentially, if you're talking about a point of view. It's as if it reflects it back where you're standing inside the mirror and looking at it. Now, they've done studies on this. Whenever you have any kind of lens, whether it's a lens in a camera or the lenses in your eyes, lenses always flip the image that they take in, okay? Now, not quite the same as a mirror. It's more just an upside-down flip. I'm just using that as an illustration. But they always flip the image. It's always turned upside down. How many of y'all, when you're just walking around, see things upside down? Okay, good. I was going to call 911, all right? we see things right side up, right? Now on a camera, it's pretty simple. Usually in a camera, it flips it upside down, but then they'll have like a second mirror or a second lens or something like that in there to flip it then right side up to where when the final product comes out on the computer or printed out, you see it right side up. Or if it's like a digital camera, sometimes it'll just take the digital image and then flip it automatically because it's programmed to do that. Well, we don't exactly have either of those things. Instead, our brain has just learned to automatically flip the image right side up. They've done studies. They have put people in glasses that flip the image upside down to where when it gets to their eyes, it then turns it right side up. But for us, that would be upside down again, right? Because we see things right side up. So basically, for all intents and purposes, these glasses flip everything in their world upside down. And they have put these glasses on people, and they have gone about all their normal activities for days. And they have tried to fiddle with stuff and tried to do all this. But something crazy happens. Even though they are seeing something that should be upside down, it's the brain that's actually flipping it in the first place. So it only takes a few days before their brain does the same thing again. In a few days, someone wearing those glasses who hasn't taken them off or done anything without them for the whole time, their brain starts reinterpreting the image, and suddenly they see right side up. They can drive a car. They can see things just as they normally would. I feel really bad for the people doing those experiments because as soon as they take those glasses off, now all of a sudden, guess what? Everything's back upside down again. But our brain does that. Now you say, well, so does a camera. Well, but think about a camera. One of two things has to happen, right? You have to intentionally put either another lens or a mirror or something inside the camera, or you have to intentionally program the camera or the computer or whatever to flip the image. Guess what all those things involve? Someone knowing, hey, this is what needs to happen, and then using intelligence, they put in the mirror, they program the computer, they program the camera. Our brains just do it. We don't tell our brains, hey, flip this thing right side up. It just does it automatically. Where does that come from? Where could that intelligence come from? If we went to Mars, and apparently we're working on it, we went to Mars. Talks for so long about, oh, maybe there's life on Mars, maybe there's life on Mars. If they step off of the Mars whatever landing craft that eventually they're supposedly going to build, and they stick a man on Mars, he walks a few hundred yards on the surface of Mars and he finds one of these. Sorry, one of these. He finds one of those, just lying on the surface of Mars. You think that he is going to say, well, this could be a sign of intelligent life, or this could have just formed by the conditions of Mars. Clearly, unless someone had already been to Mars, and therefore they said, oh, somebody left this last time when you talked to our guys about littering. Unless that were the case, they would say, there is intelligent life on Mars. We have found a piece of technology, of alien Martian technology. Everyone, now whatever their beliefs were, they would say this has to be proof of intelligent life. And yet our eyes, which by many standards are far better even than cameras we can come up with today, somehow evolved. Again, evolutionists will protest, well, there's more nuance to it. Evolutionists protest, oh, well, you're forgetting about the laws that govern biological development, all this kind of stuff. And I'm sitting here and going, okay, I understand that we could talk about a whole lot more related to this. But here's the simple fact. We're talking about intelligence or no intelligence. Clearly, even this cheap, simple camera right here, much less this thing. This thing's probably a couple $1,000s. This one's like 100, if that. Clearly, it had intelligence involved in its design. Even if you stick this thing, let's say you found this thing inside a robot, right? Even if that robot can somehow reproduce itself, somehow build other robots, you still have to start with something that's intelligent to get there. And you still have to have intelligence to program it to make all those decisions. This just doesn't happen on its own. So, this one's a little briefer than some of the other ones that we went over, but I felt like it was worth looking at both because of how Darwin kind of himself admitted that at least at face value there's an issue here, and then he tries to explain it away, but when you really look at it, this isn't a factor of time. We've talked about that before, right? There's a certain level of probability at which it doesn't matter how much time you give it, it can't happen. For example, we've talked about this in relation to prophecy. I'll just remind us of this idea. The odds of 7 prophecies, remember there's about 300 prophecies of Jesus. The odds of 7 prophecies, all coming true about one man, Jesus, are the same as if you took someone blindfolded, dropped them off in the state of Texas at a random spot, covered the state of Texas, 2 feet deep with silver dollars, I think it was, and they had to pick one marked silver dollar out of that whole list. That's not, if you try that enough times, eventually they'll get the one silver dollar. And I'm not talking about if you take them one at a time. I'm talking about if they all stay the same amount of silver dollars. That's never going to happen. It's not that might happen eventually. It's not. It can't. As much as people try and argue against it, the eye is just one, comparatively, in many ways, simple example. I would say cells are even more complex than just the basic structure of the eye, but of course, what's the eye made of? Right? It's made of cells. And cells contain what? DNA. So all of this stacks on each other as well. But even if we just take the basic structure of an eye, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So, as we wrap up for the evening, I hope this gives us yet another piece of the puzzle to try and kind of connect some of these dots. If someone brings something like this up and they're like, this could do this, that, the other, just start asking them questions. Knowing things like what we've talked about. Start asking questions about why we would assume that something like a camera would certainly be a sign of intelligence when one of these things that every one of us have, most of us, if we're lucky, have 2 of them, we supposedly just happened upon these just happened to us with no input from any kind of outside intelligence whatsoever. It doesn't work. As always, the Lord's invitation is open. We always want to be here to encourage one another. We always want to remember that we are here to support each other as we're going through various struggles and trials and whatever the case might be. If there is something we can help you with, please let us know as we stand and sing. Stand up for Jesus, sing ye soul.